This video is a brief revision into serialism, which we've been looking at in class. So, there are four key terms when we come to discussing harmony. The first two we've discussed in a lot of detail over the last 3 years. The second two are new this term. So, major harmony, something that sounds bright and happy. So we might have something by Beethoven, sounds a bit like this. Nice and bright. Minor is a little bit sadder, it's darker, it's a little bit more gloomy. Okay, so it might be something by Mozart like this. Then, composers in the 20th century started to use something called dissonance, which became something that we call atonal. Okay, and serialism is a part of the atonal movement. Okay, so anything that is serialist is largely part of the atonal movement. Now, atonal means something that doesn't have a key. And it sounds very harsh and very frustrating to listen to. So it might be something like this. A bit weird. But the important thing to realise is that composers were starting to break the rules of traditional harmony in order to develop something new and interesting. Now, what we have to do is find out how they did that. First, let's look at some key composers. So, the Viennese school is our first wave of sort of superstar composers that came into being in the classical and romantic periods. So, three main ones: Beethoven, Mozart, and Schumann. They wrote tonal music, okay? Now, in the 20th century, we have three new composers that start to come into prominence. And these are the second Viennese school: Schoenberg, Webern, and Berg. And they are starting to produce music in a very different way, using notation in a much more abstract fashion and doing away with traditional rules of harmony to create something that sounds a little bit cruder and a little bit more adventurous. Okay? Now, how they do that is very important. You'll notice here, this is one octave on the piano, and as we can see, we have 12 individual pitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 before we get back to C again. 12 pitches. This is very important. It's a little bit easier to see when we look at it in a circle like this. We have our 12 individual pitches that circulate back round to our C at the beginning. Now, what serialist composers did was that they came up with an order of how to play every single note in the 12-tone octave, okay? They did all sorts of weird and wonderful ways of doing this, mathematical formulas, or even artistic templates, something that might look a bit like that, and then start with a different note, bing, and then finish up that one, etc. So we get a sort of circular effect. Okay, now there are loads of different ways to do it, but the point is we have chosen all our notes in a specific order without repeating one, okay? And that is essentially what serialism is all about. What they would then do is that they would use all sorts of techniques in order to help give their music a little bit of interest. So they would look at things like dynamics, articulation, structure, and tempo. And what's important to remember is that they would often have large varieties in these things. So their dynamics might start really loud and then very, very quickly get very quiet. Big extremes in dynamics, big extremes in articulation. They would mess with the structure, so it wouldn't be something that you would typically listen to. And the tempo would often be irregular. You wouldn't be able to find a consistent pulse throughout the piece. So let's listen to something by Alban Berg, and you will be able to see how we have massive extremes in dynamics, massive extremes in articulation. We don't have a defined structure, and we certainly can't really tell what the tempo is. So it might be something like his 3 little pieces for cello and piano. Very extreme and difficult to listen to. What I recommend for your homework and for your revision is firstly to go back to our 12-tone row, practice creating a 12-tone row using each of the individual pitches, and then try and experiment with different ways in how you can use these 12 tones. Okay, so think about extremes in dynamics, extremes in articulation, recall the keywords, and try and practice how you might construct a 12-tone row to confine by those sorts of standards. Okay? Thanks very much.